Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live webinar. Is education the next silver bullet for growth? Brought to you by TSIA and sponsored by Intellum. My name's Vanessa Lucero, and I'll be your moderator for today. I would now like to introduce our presenters today. John Ragsdale, Distinguished Researcher, Vice President, Technology Ecosystems for TSIA, and Greg Rose, Chief Experience Officer for Intellum. As with all of our TSIA webinars, we do have a lot of exciting content to cover in the next 45 minutes. So let's jump right in and get started. John, over to you.
Well, thank you, Vanessa. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. There's no denying that education services or the customer learning organization has made a rapid transformation from cost center to profit center. And today we're going to be exploring some of the ways that the customer learning team is really impacting ARR, annual recurring revenue, and some of the impacts they are having on other parts of the organization as well. As an example of this transformation, I have some data here showing the charters of customer success organizations and the most latest data on charters of the education services organization. And both of them have a primary charter of increasing customer adoption. And I'm sure you all know this, but the more customer learning that customers consume, it's going to help them more rapidly and more fully adopt the product. And the more rapidly and fully they adopt the product, they're going to get value, outcomes, ROI faster and higher. And we know that when companies are getting that ROI, it makes the renewal much easier. It makes expand selling activities much easier. So all of that future annual recurring revenue is really rooted in prescribing those learning paths and customers taking that learning so they're able to use and get value from the products. As an example, you know, it's so important that you're all looking for ways to prove that the learning that you're providing and that customers are consuming is leading to renewals. And this is one correlation from our benchmark showing that the customers that are consuming more of the learning content have a higher renewal rate. So product install base penetration is a percentage of companies that buy the product and complete all of the prescribed learning. And with a higher install base penetration, we're seeing a 92% renewal rate compared to an 87% with a lower install base penetration. So, you know, that's just something for you to think about. What data do you have that you can start doing this correlation? Because if you're not getting the influence, visibility, and respect that you need from the senior leadership team of your company, if you can start showing them these correlations, it's really going to help them understand the strategic role that you're playing. I had conversations with Maria Manning Chapman, who is the Distinguished Researcher and Vice President of Research for our Education Services research area. And she wanted me to make sure I talked about the importance of having a documented education services strategy. This takes those charters that I showed on the previous slide and talks about, you know, what this charter means, how it's going to be measured, how you're going to achieve it. And I have some data points here showing that companies that have this documented strategy have a much higher growth rate for revenue. They have a higher net promoter score, that customers are really appreciating the content and recommending that other customers consume the content as well. So make sure that you are working on documenting that strategy, making sure everybody on the team is aware of that strategy, and we can prove here with our data that it does pay off. Another element that Greg's going to touch on today when we're thinking about revenue is the role of channel partners. And we need to make sure that we're training the channel partners, and we need to be providing the amazing content you're creating for customers for channel partners to share with their customers. And just a little data on this topic, 79% of technology firms do task the education services team with training the channel partners. And that doesn't mean they're giving it away. 21% say that all of the partner training is fee-based. All training is free is only 16%, 63%. Some training is free, some is fee-based. So there is a path to revenue for the partners, and obviously setting them up for success is really critical for your total revenue moving forward. So we're also going to be talking about some of the impacts that having a good education strategy will have on other departments. And an obvious one is your technical support organization. And this is data from a webinar poll that Maria and I did last year. I'm asking if your education services team is receiving a top 10 frequently asked question list from support. And this is really important because if customers are really struggling to figure out how to use a particular feature or a product, you need to make sure that you've got content explaining that. It needs to be prioritized in onboarding because that's going to remove one of those friction points for the customer and making that adoption that much easier. And it also cuts a lot of money. The average support ticket cost for a basic ticket is about $175. It can be a lot more expensive. It's getting escalated. But if you can start reducing some of these support tickets, the cost savings can be in the millions of dollars for the support organization, and they will have your undying love and respect for the work that you're doing to help them out. So make sure that you're collaborating with support, understanding what customers are struggling with in the product. And again, you can work with the customer success organization on prioritizing that when they're recommending the onboarding paths for customers. And my final slide, I think it's fair to say that education services has often struggled to get the budget they need for technology. And the technology has been changing so rapidly for customer learning. And the way customers want to consume learning is also changing. And this is forcing a lot of investments in new digital capabilities, not only in the creation of the content, the delivery of the content, the analytics on how customers are consuming that content. And we're starting to see some really high planned spending. This data is from the technology surveys that I completed the end of last year. And we asked if you had budget for 3 of these key technologies for education services, learning management systems, content development systems, and learning experience platforms. And you can see that a very high percentage are planning an investment. This was for 2023 and 2024. So I think it's great news in a tough economy. That education services is getting the budget that they're asking for. They're investing in some new technology. And if you're going to ultimately be delivering higher annual recurring revenue, you've got to improve the customer experience. And technology is a critical enabler of that. Well, enough for me. I would like to turn things over now to our guest speaker today. Greg Rose is the Chief Experience Officer for Intellum. Greg, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks, John. All right. So I want to start my time today with a short story. So I've been thinking a lot about the fact that the modern sales process is evolving. It's becoming very, very visionary. So we know that buyers are savvier than ever. Sales is reacting to that, and it's moved beyond the art of the possible and into selling a very unique vision for the future. The sales process is now engineered to tap into the ambitions of the buyer. Sales is creating excitement, and they're setting this expectation that the solution that they're selling is a catalyst for change and for progress that's all going to be led by the buyer. This is an incredibly solid sales strategy. And I think at the end of the day, it makes the buyer think that she's going to become a hero inside her organization. But here's a very common scenario right now. The buyer gets excited about the vision she was sold. Sales does its job. It closes the deal. The buyer steps back as her team steps forward into all that post-sale activity like implementation. They're racing towards the go live. Account management picks it up, begins to manage the relationship. The project launches, problems are going to go to support. We fast forward to renewal time. The buyer's team has struggled to achieve the results that the buyer bought. And the client team's going to, they're going to blame the product, they're going to blame the vendor, they're going to blame anybody, but themselves. The disillusioned buyer is going to go red. Account management goes into reactionary save mode. The client churns. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Because it certainly does to me. The more I think about it, though, I wonder how much of the frustration and the disconnect between the sale and the churn of the client stems from a lack of knowledge and how to achieve the vision versus the solution that we sell being a low quality product or service. So today, I'm going to talk about the fact that lots of companies are getting ahead of this scenario with a very proactive approach that's based on education. So when we pull back and look at this scenario I just presented from the 50,000 foot view, getting better at teaching the buyer and more importantly, the people who are tasked with fulfilling the vision for the buyer, teaching people how to be more successful with your products, like that's one of those moments when we have to stop and ask, like, hold up. So why is teaching our customers how to use our products successfully not our main focus for the year? How is there something, what else could be more important than this initiative right now? I could do a whole session on why I think it's not often a main focus, but the short answer is because I think people assume that it's really hard. And it's not as hard as you may think it is, which we're going to get to in a minute. But before I jump into that, though, we're going to look at some more data. Yay! But I want you to stay with me because my main goal today is to provide you with the data that you can leverage along with the TSIA data that John has already shared to secure the buy-in and the budget that you need to build a program or improve a program that moves the needle on real business goals like revenue growth and cost reduction. Then we're going to look at how you can quickly build to get to these results. All right, so here I go. We recently completed an industry deep dive that completely jives with the TSIA data that John just walked us through. So if we're marshaling support for launching or improving an education initiative, the most useful data point is that companies are rapidly getting better at teaching users how to achieve that vision. Now, we know this because in the recent past, the average number of customers or partners, as John correctly mentioned, or even frontline employees who are engaged in a company's education initiative, it was around 20 to 30%. This recent research shows that it's now 50%. And this increase suggests that companies are getting better at education generally, and that customers are getting more comfortable engaging in those education experiences. Just as the TSIA data shows, we also found that there's a rapidly increasing focus on education as a strategy to drive growth results like product adoption. That's a very easy one. Our research also showed that there's a focus on customer engagement and CSAT improvement as education goals. Now, this demonstrates that companies are investing time and resources in developing content and experiences that are going beyond product training. And they're honing in on how they can get ahead of this inevitable churn when the buyer doesn't achieve her personal goals. So a 30 to 40% increase in product adoption, in engagement, in CSAT as a direct result of education is downright amazing. Those numbers blow me away. And I promise we're going to look at how you can create, improve that kind of impact in a few slides. Okay, so now we know two things. The customers are engaging in education and that education is working for a bunch of companies. You can use this data now, the data that's on the previous slides, to prove both of those points. So now let's look at what kind of education successful programs are focusing on. So this chart has a ton of information on it. It's probably really small for you, and I realize that. It also backs up the TSIA data on which initiatives companies are focusing on. So you'll see things like product adoption, support costs. But there's something kind of hiding in our data that I think is really important, an important part of the story when you're trying to secure that investment for the launch of a program or to improve an existing program. I put a box around it and I highlighted 3 really important things I want to call out. There are 3 areas for education strategy that we see increasing significantly. That's win rate, shortening the sales cycle, shortening the onboarding cycle. So this is proof that education is being pulled forward in the sales process, where companies are not just marketing to prospects, they're now teaching them how to use their products and services as a strategy for closing deals. Now we're getting into some big time revenue stuff. And so let's look at what specific revenue stuff they're tying the consumption of this education content to. So these successful companies are now reporting big time impacts on revenue and growth numbers. So let's pause here for a second. Revenue and growth numbers, like a 35% increase in the average lifetime value, a 29% increase in closed won business, a 22% increase in customer retention. And so if education can make this kind of impact on revenue alone, you have to ask, why is this not a major growth strategy for our company today? Because it is a major growth strategy for your competitors. The trend we're seeing is very, very clear. Companies are rapidly increasing their spend on education programs that are tightly orchestrated and that are crossing the pre and post sales experience at a significant rate because it's working. And if we look at what your competitors are investing in, I didn't intend for this slide to be as self-serving as it may appear for a platform vendor. And I'll say for the record that this research goes far beyond our customers. It looks at the industry as a whole. Those guys wouldn't let me manipulate it even if I tried. But the biggest spend right now, as John alluded to earlier, is on upgrading to a platform that can handle the kind of ultra modern education programs that are driving these kind of results. And not a lot of the platforms that exist today have what's necessary to help the customer get there. So what you're looking for in a platform is a learner experience for prospects, for customers, for partners, that is equal to the kind of experience that those users are having in other places already and that they now expect from you. The right platform can provide the ability to track and report on all of this activity and engagement, giving you deeper insight into what's working. The right platform has an ability to not only manage content, but also manage users at scale, because the goal is to grow this and to grow it rapidly. So that's what you're looking for in a platform. And I'm always happy to talk more about platform strategy. So talk to me after the webinar if you want to get deeper into platform. But aside from like a really great platform, you also need great content. And so developing education content is a science and it's a discipline, and the investment in internal resources and third-party partners who can build that kind of content also is growing rapidly. Okay, so let's recap. Here's what we know. We know that the customer audience or the partner audience will consume the content that we build if the content's good. We know that when the experience and the content are good, that business impact is real. We know that education is so successful that companies are now using education to close more business, which is amazing. And we also know that companies are now spending more than ever before because these kinds of results are happening. All right, so you now have the data to make the case for launching or improving an education platform. And the question now is, okay, Greg, so what do you actually do to launch or improve a program? And I promised 4 insights that I've gleaned from working with extremely large companies, fairly small companies, but the ones that manage very successful programs. And the first insight is that you've got to define education for your organization. So there are a lot of education initiatives that are happening inside your company today. And the things that are on this slide are actual examples of cross-departmental motions and initiatives that I recently saw with a new client who had a fledgling program. All of these things existed for her. And people often worry about which function area owns what. They don't want to step on people's toes. And my advice is you need to go for it and proactively take a stab at defining what education motions already exist inside your organization today. If you're not aware that this kind of mapping already exists, then it's highly likely that no one else is thinking holistically about it. Documenting where and when education happens is a great way to start the business case work. Is this a pre-sales touch point during the sales cycle? Is it onboarding? Is it support? Is it renewal focused? Which things are or should be making an impact? Now, regardless of where the specific content or experience falls in the customer or partner or even that frontline employee journey, there are really only 4 types of education initiatives that can be delivered through an education platform. So a good exercise to go through when you're creating a new initiative or you're auditing or reviewing an existing program is to organize your content and all of these learner experience, because social learning, for example, is a very real and important thing. We want to organize all of the content, all of these experiences into these 4 initiative types. Now, if you struggle to fit something into one of these 4 buckets, it may not be a viable education initiative. So an example is always marketing. A good rule of thumb is that marketing materials, we try to keep them out of the education environment. Now, I'm a former marketer before I got deep into the education industry. And I understand the importance and the impact of marketing-driven content. It's volume. It's easy to pull it in and try to fill up the environment. But the art of convincing someone to do something is not the same thing as the science of teaching someone how to do something. So honing in on the initiatives that are educational in nature is a really important part of this process. And content that doesn't teach someone how to do something will not help you reach the goals that education could be driving and the kind of results that we're looking at today. Successful education program owners build business cases from the jump. So learning outcomes are really important, but every education initiative can and should be tied to a business outcome like revenue, retention, performance, or cost reduction. And so in my experience, it doesn't really matter whether we're starting from scratch or you oversee a big mature program. You can and you should start this part of the exercise fairly smallish. So to start, what I recommend is that you focus on the few initiatives that have the highest likelihood of impacting the business goals that the company is already marching towards. So let's assume, and I think it's very safe to assume right now, that there's a focus on cost reduction in your organization. So maybe we have, John alluded to this earlier, maybe we have an unexpected increase in tickets, and that increase is growing rapidly. Ticket reduction is an exercise that's well suited for education. So let's assume that we're not suffering, this is important, we're not suffering from a crappy product. Then we could ask, are customers submitting tickets because they don't know how to use the product correctly? The answer to that question, by the way, is in the tickets themselves. So then we would ask, do we have a formalized and well put together onboarding curriculum? If the answer is no, then we need to create one as soon as possible. If the answer is yes, we have an onboarding curriculum, then we need to take a closer look at it. Can we rework the onboarding content and make sure that it is engineered to address the specific concepts that we see in the tickets that the customer needs to know? Now, not just the things that they need to know in order to use the product the way we intended, not just for that, but to ensure that the buyer's expectations are going to be met. So see how I went full circle there, bringing it back to not just product utilization, but the buyer's expectations. We can build for that from the beginning. Now we're talking about, we're honing in on one specific initiative, a new or an updated onboarding that's tied directly to a major company goal, which is cost reduction. So now we're going to develop a hypothesis. We can reduce ticket volume this year by 20% through an updated onboarding initiative. Okay, all right. So let's recap before we get to our fourth and our final insight. I love to recap, make sure we're level setting. So we've identified and documented all of the true learning initiatives that are in play inside of our organization today. We got them. Okay. We've consolidated them into those 4 core initiative types. Now we know what we've got and what we can and should focus on. We've identified a big time needle mover initiative, and we've tied it to a big time company goal. So correlating the consumption of content to the business outcomes feels hard. And I think people don't do it because it feels hard to do. We've got the content in there. People are consuming the content. I see that there's completions. I even see there's an increase in completion. But how do I tie that then to the ability to reduce cost or the impact on the ticket? This is what separates world-class learning programs from not so world-class ones. Not money, not resources, not company size, not content, not education expertise. It's the ability to prove the business impact of a specific education initiative. So let's go back to the onboarding example. We should certainly look at completions and assessment scores as leading indicators of effectiveness. But we're going to measure the success of this onboarding initiative with a cost reduction money number. And you don't track these kinds of business outcomes in your learning platform. To get to the correlation, to prove the hypothesis, you're going to have to partner, in this instance, with the support team to look at several data points at the user level. Now, again, it's one thing to build the content and to see that people are consuming it. That's important. That's good. The question is, how do we make the jump from, okay, I know people are completing the content, so I know what the impact is on the business. With this example of ticket reduction, we're going to partner with the support team. We're going to ask, do the users who complete the new onboarding content submit fewer tickets than those who have not completed it? Do the subsets of users who previously submitted a lot of tickets submit less tickets after they've completed the content? Now, John told us that the average cost of a ticket is $175. So how much money did we save the company by reducing ticket volume, let's say by 17%. We got really close to the goal. That number starts to get really, really big. You can then recreate this exercise for the other main initiatives that you think are going to move the needle. But this map sort of helps us focus on the few things that are actually going to make the impact. You partner with other function areas to get the data you need to prove your various hypotheses and the impact of education on these additional business goals. And then it's just a matter of consistently, constantly inspecting the performance, which also is something a lot of companies don't do. They sort of set it and forget it. We've got to constantly look at performance for each of these initiatives. We iterate, we improve the content so that it's continuing to move towards the goal. An education environment can be really full of stuff. It can be real complex, have a lot of stuff. And so all of that content and all these experiences are really important. But if we can group the content into these high-level initiatives like onboarding or certification, if we can focus on the few initiatives that positively impact the business goals, like driving revenue, retention, or cost, we're going to let all the other stuff keep happening. But if we can really hone in on just these things as our focus as leaders, if we work with the internal partners to get access to that sort of next step performance data, we are now demonstrating real education ROI. We're proving that education really can be the silver bullet for growth. All right, John, I just talked for a long time, and I really appreciate the pulpit. I love this story, and I could tell this story. We could go for 2 more hours, but I'm going to slow down and back off, and I'll turn it back over to you.
John, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Greg, great information. Always good to get a view from someone deep in the trenches, working with a lot of different companies. Vanessa, I know that we're getting questions in from the audience. Why don't you go to some Q&A?
All righty, let's do it. And just as a reminder, if anybody would like to submit a question, even if we can't answer it here live, we will follow up with you. So please go ahead and put it in that ask a question box in the upper left-hand side of your screen. And I'll start with Claire's question here. And they say, I found it difficult to get access to data from different platforms to improve value. How have other companies navigated this challenge?
John, you want me to go first? I certainly have an opinion. That's a great question, and it is something we see all the time. I think that depending on the company, let's imagine we work in a company where everything's really siloed, and we run into this like, how do we get access to the data? One thing I've seen is actually roadblocks that are like, you cannot have this data. I'm not going to give you individual user spend data. You can't have it. One thing I've seen education leaders, program owners do successfully, they take the learner data and they say, okay, revenue ops team, here is a group of learners that completed the data. There's 600 people in this cohort. It's a group of power users. Here's all of their user IDs or all of their names, however we track those users. Here's the group. I want you to take this list of people, and I just want you to tell me if there is an average increase in spend across those 600 users after this date. And that's the date at which all of those 600 users have completed that content. If we can get back the average increase in spend for that cohort of power users that completed the content, then we know what the average impact is on a user. From an executive level, that's all they need. You've now demonstrated the actual average revenue impact per user. You don't have to get back from RevOps all of that data. I think it's more about the partnership. Now, something John and I have talked about is often in this scenario, when things are super siloed, and we approach it this way, like just show me the average, impact, do it on your side of the fence. I need one number. We get that number back. It starts to help open those doors and tear down those silos. I mean, I've seen this over and over and over again. And then we start, people want to know more. They want to know more about how we're impacting revenue numbers. What about support costs? What about product adoption? You've got new teams that are coming to you and asking for help. That'll start to break down silos too.
Well, I think that you're right that if you don't have any of this today, get what you can to start showing that correlation. But I think it's a bigger problem because according to a recent survey we did, only 28% of companies are able to correlate specific journey events to annual recurring revenue. 28%. That doesn't mean you don't have the data. It means it's all siloed, you're not sharing it. And I don't think this is a problem education services needs to solve. This is why, in particular, with the big move toward AI, that it is critical that you've got a cross-enterprise AI ops team, because no department owns their data. It's all company data. And a cross-enterprise team needs to be inventorying all that data and looking at how can we start normalizing that data to understand the influence of every single thing, the implementation, the onboarding, the support experience. How are these impacting renewals and expand selling? And it's very frustrating to me that companies aren't farther along than that, because we see some companies that have been doing this for years and they're incredibly smart. And they're delivering a superior customer experience because they've got the data to know what good looks like. Yeah. So ultimately, this is going to be a competitive issue in the marketplace. If you are not doing this, your customers are going to feel it, and they're going to vote with their wallets and go to your competitor who is. So do what you can to get this data, to get that visibility and respect you need. But you need to be building this case with your executive team, because this is a problem for support, for professional services, for the sales team, for the marketing team. This is a problem for everybody.
Agreed. I want to add one more thought there, John, because I agree with everything you said. In that scenario, I also think it's really, really hard and frankly, somewhat impossible to retroactively try to suss out the impact of a bucket full of education. So it doesn't matter, like the data, that is really hard to do. If I were in a scenario in which there was a bunch of education happening, there was a bunch of content, there were a bunch of silos, I can't get the data. This takes me back to my point that you can start this whole thing very small. I think what I would do is build an initiative that starts with the business objective in mind. It's really hard to take an education initiative or content that wasn't built to impact that number and then try to prove how it impacts the number. I think I would go the other way. I think I would literally call it a pilot. I would launch a pilot onboarding program with a subset of users. I would work it, I'd work them through to completion. I would measure the impact on whatever the business outcome is I built it for. So I would build the education specifically to reduce tickets. And when I did that and could prove that it was successful, then I think, that opens the door to start one, having the broader data conversation, and maybe two, to get the kind of investment or support we need to go back and start looking at the content and the initiatives themselves to sort of update and rebuild the thing.
Okay. Our next, I have to squeeze this one in. I think you'll like this, Greg. Dan says, love the vinyl, especially OK Computer. We have more questions.
That record was life-changing, Dan. So I couldn't agree with you more. I think this was, for the record, I think this one's really important too. So Appetite for Destruction changed rock and roll, but I'm like that meme of the guy sitting at the table with the coffee cup, it says, change my mind. Like we can debate the importance of Guns N' Roses.
Okay. Well, how about this one here? This is from Dennis. And they say, who do you see as an advocate for the ES team to get budget for new technology? Is it the CCO or the CRO, or who would be best?
You want to go first, John, or you want me to go?
Yeah, I think this is a really common issue for services organizations who have not always been seen as the drivers of revenue. And I think if you've got a great customer success leader, they should get this because they're doing the renewals and they're hearing the complaints about, I didn't get anything out of the training or the support experience was terrible. So they're understanding that. If you've got a success leader, a success executive with clout, they can be a good advocate. I thought a couple of years ago that the CCO was going to solve this problem because they were responsible for the end-to-end customer experience and they would be the advocate. I have to say, I'm saying that the CRO is starting to assume more of that role. The CRO used to only care about landing new customers, and now that forward-looking CROs own the entire land, expand, renew process, they're getting involved in why aren't we renewing? What is causing dissatisfaction? Should we be doing sentiment analysis? So I just think you need to figure out who's got the clout and who understands things from the customer perspective. They will understand your case and they will make your case for you. But if you're all alone, stranded on an island, education services, clamoring for respect, it may not happen. So you definitely need to find that advocate.
I totally agree with you. I think what the data we looked at shows, I think we can make an assumption. This crossing pre and post sales aligns directly with your message, John, that like in this world, CROs are looking more holistically and all the things that are going to get them to the goal. And that goal is revenue. Revenue comes from new logos. Revenue comes from renewals. It comes from expansion. It comes from cross-sell, upsell. Anything, any strategy that you can present and say, hey, today with a fairly modest investment, we can make a pretty big impact on all of those things. CRO seems like a good person to go to. I think it sort of depends on the organization and who holds the pain point, which John, I think you also addressed. If you have a support cost problem, then whoever in the organization ultimately owns support is the person you're marshaling, you're trying to get on board. One thing I've seen work, and this is sort of sneaky, and I love it because it is sneaky and looks unimportant, and then people can go in with the attack. Twice, I've seen two different education owners do a very simple stakeholder survey. And this survey is intended to extract pain points from those stakeholders or functionary leaders that could be addressed through education. And the program owner then is able to identify inside, the organization, across stakeholders, across function areas, across, senior leadership, all the way up into executive leadership, who has the problem, the real need. So if you write it can be really simple, but if you write a stakeholder survey well, and you get it in front of folks, get that data back, you kind of flip the tables on them and be like, hey, you told me this was the biggest problem. I can solve this with education. And then you've got a champion.
I feel like if I don't say this, Archie will be upset. Archie mentioned he sees the Rush 2112. Sorry for my ignorance there. He sees your album. Sounds like he's a fan. So way to go, Greg.
Oh my God. No, it's also incredibly important. I mean, let's do another webinar where we talk through musicology and the history of the role. Would love that. And Archie and Dan, all these guys can come and join, and we'll debate, which album should be on the wall behind me and which should not.
I love it. I'm just going to take another second here to thank you, John and Greg, for delivering an outstanding session. And thank you all for joining us and taking the time out of your busy days to enjoy Is Education the Next Silver Bullet for Growth? Brought to you by TSIA and sponsored by Intellum. We answered that question. I love it. We look forward to seeing you at our next TSIA webinar. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.